for you, Karen. And when you talked about with derivatives and speculation, thank you, that we talked about the perspective, the Muslim perspective, checking with the Islamic scholars, recognizing that there's hesitancy to engage in such processes, but that they are. And so how is that adjudicated then through Islam's perspective? In other words, what are they using in the modern translation with application perhaps? Is that just part of doing global business practice? How do they actually justify that?
Okay, well, there are a couple of answers to that question. First, the overriding discussion in the field of derivatives is the idea of risk in general. And a basic question is, which is preferable, to take on more risk because you're unable to hedge because of the strict interpretation of the law, or is it actually less risky to be able to hedge like your competitors would be able to manage risk? And so one of the interesting practicality, Islamic finance is a very practical industry, and that's not to say they make the laws fit what needs to be done, but it's very practical in the sense that the scholars most scholars do recognize that there is this need for risk management, and in today's world, you use derivatives for risk management.
Yeah, and wait, that went off. Did that go off? No, it's still on. Huh.
Is that thing off?
It's still on.
Yeah, is that one still on?
Nope, it's off. It's off. Wait, did that come back?
No.
Oh, maybe that shut off.
Thank you.
Just like you caused it.
The technology is so interconnected. Okay, so but actually, if you think about it, the derivatives market is actually quite organized, and so there are ways. There's a clearinghouse, a central clearinghouse for derivatives trading, and that central clearinghouse mitigates a lot of the risk in trading the derivatives. So, ironically, I guess, the existence of that institutional clearinghouse, since it mitigates the risk of derivatives, it's actually been used by a lot of scholars as justification for the ability to participate in some derivatives transactions. Some transactions. What is still specifically prohibited is any kind of trading in currency or gold and silver, which is considered to be equivalent to currencies, because it's greatly prohibited to trade different amounts of currencies and to profit from the difference in currencies. So hopefully, thank you, got back in.
Karen, I have a question.
Okay.
Don't you think that most of Islamic finance is just a facade? They do whatever they want to and then just try to justify through Sharia or something?
Well, do I think that? I can't think that because that's how I make my living. But no, what I find important about the industry, and I know that if I get up there and draw how the money actually flows in most of the transactions, you'll say, well, that's exactly the same thing. But I think what's been important about the industry is...
Is that back? Oh.
Yes.
Yes. So what's been important about the industry is that it questions existing methods of structuring financial transactions, like the derivatives, like the mortgages, and like taking on debt from a bank, and thinking about what is your responsibility, or what are each party's responsibilities toward each other in a business transaction, in a financial transaction.
That includes the lender.
Yes, it includes the lender to the borrower and the borrower to the lender. And like Professor George mentioned, as much as the lender is supposed to, they wouldn't, not necessarily say show mercy, but more be just and equitable and try to help you know, if the borrower gets into trouble, it's equally the borrower's responsibility to repay a debt that they have incurred. So it does go both ways. So I think the importance is the rethinking or the rethinking of financial transactions and financial relationships.
Also, the question for you. So, what are, if you're not allowed to charge interest, where is the evaluating transaction in a mortgage if you can't charge interest on it? Is there equivalent fees, or how does that actually work?
Yeah. So, in a mortgage example, there is a profit rate, a profit. Okay, and so what happens there are a few different ways to structure mortgages, but I'll give you the most common one in the U.S. And also I know about it because I did refinance my mortgage recently, and I do now have a Sharia compliant mortgage. So I can tell you from experience as well as from the books. So what happens is that the buyer identifies the house, the bank actually purchases the home and resells it to the buyer at a markup. So if the price of the home is $100,000, then the bank will resell it for like $300,000. All right. Yeah. So you're incurring a debt of $300,000 to the bank. And so yes, the money does flow in the same way.
Okay, yeah, because I wondered, because I actually have a Sharia compliant lease where I rent, and I wondered that because it was structured. The lease is structured a little bit different in that he added up all the costs that go in, then added 5% to it, and called that rather than charging you, a 5% interest rate on it. Right. But to me, that gets back to is it really a facade? Because it's the same thing at the end of the day. You're just calling it something else.
Right. Well, there's a couple of things that are different. The main difference is that the bank does take the ownership, and I know this, and I realize I'm very lucky to live where I live in Wilmette because we have a transfer tax, a real estate transfer tax, but they negotiated with the bank not to have to pay on a refinance. But if it were the original transaction, I would actually have to pay 2 sets of transfer taxes. So the bank does actually legally take ownership, and that is thought that the bank is taking on more risk than a conventional bank would.
Karen, back to the mortgage example, and as I understand from Islam is that we have to be partners in profit and in loss. So now if the bank buys the house, the $100,000 house, sells it to me for $300,000, and the value goes down.
Yes, yeah. Yes, both the bank and the borrower will, take it.
How would, like, for example, if from 100 it came to be 80,000, there's a $20,000 loss in that house.
Right, well, the borrower would still take on a lot of the risk in that situation, but, because it's a debt, okay, the borrower has, the bank takes on the risk when it assumes ownership and then resells it. After the bank sells the asset, sells the house to the buyer, it's a debt, it becomes a debt. And so the bank is no longer taking on the risk of ownership.
Also, the bank takes its profit in the beginning.
Yes. Oh, creates a debt. Creates a debt that includes the
$100,000 profit right now.
Yes, they do. And that brings up another interesting thing in terms of regulations, in terms of U.S. regulations, and the idea of prepaying a mortgage. Okay, so in a purely Islamic transaction like I just described to you, the borrower cannot prepay because the borrower has incurred a debt of $300,000 to the bank. But U.S. regulations require there to be the borrower to be able to prepay the mortgage or to pay off the mortgage early, right? And so that has had to be tweaked in the U.S. market so that you can pay off your mortgage early if you want to.
Okay, what benefits did you get by having a Sharia mortgage?
What benefits? There's really no financial benefit. It's really a moral benefit.
Okay.